All right, thank you to all the presenters giving some really valuable information about water conservation. So for the remainder of the meeting, we're going to have two more facilitated discussions. The first that we're going to start right now is pertaining to what we've just heard about, water conservation. And I'd like to I see that there's a strong handful of people that are in the audience that have laptops in front of them. So I'd like to start this part of this discussion off with to maybe take about 3 minutes to either if you have a laptop or go congregate around someone with a laptop and actually talk about these 3 questions that are posed for discussion number 2, and just to type in a couple quick responses for this. Hoping this will just kind of get some of the thought process going on this and will give us some information up here to start the discussion. So we'll take about 3 minutes to do that, and I know everyone doesn't have laptops. Does anybody still need the passcode that isn't on wireless? Okay, great. Well, let's take about 3 minutes to do that. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to chat with your neighbors about some of these questions. So let's start off with the first question that we posed. What current and future societal, technical, and economic challenges do you see in implementing water conservation in irrigated landscapes? And again, there'll be microphones scattered throughout, so try and track one of those down and just make sure to mention your name and organization. Who would like to be the first for this discussion? Somebody has to be first. Go ahead. Thank you.
Marcy with Weber Basin Water. I actually work out in the conservation garden, and our biggest problem right now is public perception of what a water-wise landscape should look like. Everybody thinks it has to look like California with no turf, not green, just ugly, and people don't realize that you can have a nice green lush landscape if you water efficiently and correctly. And then our other issue that we thought of is people hear water efficient, low water, anything like that, and they think their mind just shuts off. They're done. They think they're being controlled if you try to tell them, you need to be efficient. So we're trying to think of other terms to use that don't sound like we're telling them what to do, I guess.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that myself, of people thinking they were trying to be told what to do with being efficient.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Does the word stewardship resonate?
I haven't tried that one.
I would maybe just add something to that discussion, and that is that I totally understand what you're saying. We get those sort of reactions fairly regularly, and I tend to approach it from a landscape health standpoint. And one of the challenges, somebody put up there, a lack of understanding about what turf grass actually needs. And one of the big challenges with that is that turf grass can take a lot of excess water before it shows any damage, although damage is occurring. And so I really try to emphasize landscape health, and a huge aspect of that is efficient watering, just so happens. So that's one approach that I take.
Is anyone else seeing? Go ahead, Bart. Can somebody pass Bart a microphone?
I agree with these things that are been said. I think that what we've learned in surveys and focus groups, that the public, once you start telling them that you need to conserve, and this is what you got to do in your landscape to conserve water, they basically just shut down. They associate water conservation, water efficient landscaping, all the water-wise landscaping with having to sacrifice. And we're going to be looking at sort of a new approach to water efficient or water-wise landscaping, in which we're not going to be touting it as, first and foremost, that it's going to save water. It's going to provide many other benefits, high curb appeal, high functionality, lower maintenance, all the things that people really want in a landscape. And the bottom line is if you do it right, you're going to conserve water too. But that's not going to be how it will be touted in the advertising and so forth. And so we see this, we recognize it, and that's how we're going to approach it. And I think that we probably all need just to wipe out from our terminology the word xeriscape. It doesn't work. And for the most part, when people hear that word, they really turn off and they don't want a desert landscape. So anyway, there you have it.
Half the people that use the term xeriscape are saying zeroscape anyway, so there are some bad connotations there.
I'm Rachel Shilton, and I'm with the Division of Water Resources, and I have seen Jordan Valley's Localscape presentation, and I think they have nailed it right as far as the marketing. They are really targeting people looking at how they use their yards, their landscape, how they want to, and then designing the landscape to accommodate that lifestyle. And I think that is the approach that we need to go at so that people feel like, hey, I'm doing this for me. And then a side effect is that it saves water, but it overcomes kind of that status quo and in a beneficial way to me.
Does anyone else have any more comments on some of the challenges of actually implementing some of these water conservation strategies? Roger?
We actually have the major water wholesalers here. We have Central, we have Weber Basin, and we have Jordan Valley that all have significant low water landscape gardens, low water gardens. And the point there about public perception of water, what a water-wise landscape should look like, I can say honestly, and I'm going to speak back to Larry in our 25 years of dealing with this, particularly 25 years ago, where the idea of a low water landscape was, I'm not going to let my kids play on no stinking cactus, is what the perception was. Okay, it's come a long way since then, but I'm curious about either the wholesale agencies or the retail agencies, what they are getting feedback on about their customer base of what a low water use landscape should look like, and do they have a better sense of that? David, you're not going to get out of this.
I'm Todd with Jordan Valley. I'll speak to that a little bit. So we've conducted focus groups and had some discussion with the public, both people that have visited our garden and who have not visited our garden, all from our service area. And when the perception that we have, there was an exercise where we had individuals draw out what they depicted a water-wise landscape being. All of them associated, it's again a reflection of Bart's comments, sacrifice, cattle skulls, rattlesnakes, that kind of stuff. Nobody really using, a water-wise landscape or using the word conservation. Nobody had, at least in those exercises that we've conducted, nobody's depicted anything that looked pleasant or appealing or nice. I would say from at least the people we've studied, they don't have a really awesome outlook on a water-wise landscape.
Okay, Roger. This is David Rice with Weber Basin Water. My experience, our experience here at Weber Basin and in working at Jordan Valley as well, and it has changed. The ethic is changing. I think the general public, if they have never visited one of our gardens, one of the gardens that display some of this, I think there's still a misconception because the terminologies that are out there we just described, xeriscape and low water, there's still a mindset or a conjured up image in their heads that creates kind of an unappealing approach to landscapes. But if they come and participate in either some classes that are offered or visit and walk around and look at what the information is and how it's presented, I think they then come to the realization that it doesn't eliminate turf all the way. There's hundreds of plant varieties to choose from in a landscape setting like this. And then they learn some of the irrigation options that go with it. So, there's lots of ways to do this to make it very effective, to make it beautiful, to make it green and lush. That goes along with some of the other comments. But if they've never come, if they still have that, just with the information that's out there, there is still a strong misconception, I think, of what low water landscaping means or what it is. And, for most people, it's unappealing. And then in addition, even if they start to get the idea, if they already have a landscape installed, it is really difficult to convince them to invest whatever amount of money to change that. Water's too cheap, especially in our service area where we have secondary water that's primarily unmetered. It's an extremely difficult argument to say you should do this for the benefit of saving water, or for whatever reason, because it's a huge financial investment to change out a landscape. And so for us, we're starting to look at, well, there's a lot of new development projected. We've got a lot of growth coming up in the future. We need to start really focusing on new developments and how that ethic goes in, which will then also go backwards. People will start to see kind of that social norming thing of this is really what's an acceptable style and what's acceptable in our climate. And so those that buy older homes and start to redo, they'll also start to make those changes. And so anyway, that's kind of where we're looking at it. But there's a lot of work to be done.
Joanna?
I'm Sarah Johnson with Central Utah Water, and we are a water wholesaler. We don't retail water, and so one of the things that we've been struggling with and trying to figure out how to move forward is getting that direct communication with the retailers who are talking to their users. I mean, that communication right there, I was looking at the water mapping, that it's got to be with those retailers, For us, it's been so frustrating as a wholesaler as we participate in these programs, but we're one step removed. And it's getting to the data and we're not directly communicating with the users, and we need to get those cities involved. And I don't know, they don't typically staff the expertise that we need. So trying to figure out how do we get the education to the cities, to the residents, that disconnect is something that we're studying, we're thinking about, we're trying to figure out how to move forward within our service area.
I just have a question I'd like to ask as a follow-up to this conversation. To what extent do those of you implementing these programs, have you seen people's willingness to respond to a community need or the greater good versus does it benefit me? Because it seems as we move forward in dealing with water issues in the future, that coming together and not creating conflicts between user groups is going to be a key element of making progress. And so, it's just because the comments came up, they want to know what's in it for me, but I just wondered if some appeal to what it does for the community as a whole or the state as a whole in stretching water supplies. Is that a compelling case to the public?
Isn't one of the slogans of Slow the Flow, if we each save a little, we all save a lot? Yeah. Just checking.
Scott with Weber Basin. To answer Joanna's question, or at least comment on it, when we started implementing our secondary metering, we got a lot of backlash. Like, this is not right. We should not have meters on our secondary. And they just couldn't understand what the purpose of metering that secondary source was. And when we got into the discussions, especially in the city councils, because they were just as upset as the private citizens, we got into discussion about accountability. This is about giving you information that you need to be able to be accountable for the water you use. And for the benefit of the entire community to have enough water to sustain growth and whatever else. Once we brought up those comments, nobody wanted to say, well, I don't want to be accountable, and so they were more accepting, actually. And as we got the meters in and we got comments back from people that were using the meters saying, I can't believe I could have used that much water. There is no way I could have used that much water on my landscape. So we go through, show them the hourly data, show them that they're watering twice per day or 8 times a week or whatever. And they say, wow, that's unbelievable. And so that's why over the last 5 years, we've seen water use with those that are metered continue to ratchet down every year. And now they're 40% of what they were using. It's unbelievable. So yes, I think the public will respond, but it's going to take some doing and some education. And some money.
Well, speaking of things you need money for, so what research might you see that could help overcome some of these societal, technical, and economic challenges to water conservation that we've been speaking about? Where can the research community here help address some of these issues that the water agencies are having? Who wants to be first for this one? Chris.
Again, Chris Pengra, Eagle Mountain City. I think one of the areas that the research can be targeted is just based on the specific microclimates that exist throughout the Wasatch Front. And maybe it's more of an issue for us in Eagle Mountain than it is in most places because we've kind of a slightly higher elevation than the metropolitan areas, and we're in kind of a sink, if you will, in a basin, and the cold air pools there. So we've got very different climate in that specific area even than we do in the ranches, another portion of our city, and that has proven to have an effect on what plants can and can't grow and thrive there. Otherwise, it just turns into a wasted investment in plants.
Does anyone else have any comments about what research might be needed to help water conservation? Yes, in the back.
I'm Janice with Weber Basin Water. And this is a question maybe for you guys at Utah State. Has there been any research done on how long it typically takes to maintain a predominantly turf landscape versus a low water landscape?
This is Larry Rupp. We've made attempts, but no. There's a lot of variables in it that make it really hard. We do have a program that we did on value landscape engineering that allows you to put in parameters and get our best estimate as to what the differences would be. But I don't think we've quite gotten it to the answer that we would like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've often wondered if people kind of go to the easiest thing to maintain, and so I'm guessing that it's in the long run it's probably easier to maintain turf grass than almost anything else, because at least you can keep it looking clean and nice, and all you got to do is pay the neighbor kid to push a lawnmower across it. That's not the answer that you want, but it turns out that it's a much more difficult question, I think, to answer than because there's so many variability. So many variables that go into it. I don't know, David, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm trying to remember what the specifics were. I think there's the cost aspect there's the labor, the fertilizers, the water. This kind of also gets to Bart's comment about trying to promote water conservation for some of those other things that that users value. The main, I think, difference with turf versus, say, perennials is that you have to replace those perennials every 7 to 10 years. So there's some reinvestment or other activity that you're looking at. If you have a landscape, you're going to maintain a landscape for 30 or 40 years. We developed, we being Larry, Kelly, myself, Roger, developed a spreadsheet tool that did those calculations, and there are some benefits. I'm trying to remember what the specifics were, though. We can certainly get that information to you. But again, also it's an average values for, say, the Wasatch Front. It's not necessarily microclimate targeted.
I have a research request.
Please.
So one aspect of the water check program that we're also going to be implementing is ongoing communication with our participants. So pinging them most likely by email when schedules need to change, irrigation schedules, that is, other maintenance practices might need to happen. And I need to talk to Simon about this, actually. What would be terrific is if we had predicted ET on a pretty short-term scale that we could be communicating with folks about. And, I think about the water check program a lot, but that I think would be useful. The Division of Water Resources, for example, your lawn watering guide, I think that would be useful information. And of course, it takes communicating that and marketing it well to get it into the public realm. But that's really what we're doing here. We're looking at evapotranspiration of these landscapes and how do we meet that need and be efficient with that need. And we have, a lot of times we're looking backwards. And if we could be looking forward, I think that would be helpful. We've been talking about that in relationship to water maps. Oh, good, good.
I think with your program, a little bit of lead time with the next week, probably you can find all the information from weather forecast. To learn that a little bit, especially in these transition seasons. Yes, and data can be tailored down. And all it takes technically really just to know your format and our format and then make them work. That's it. So it's
great.
Great.
This is David at Weber Basin. We have a couple possible research requests. We're working on some things, and we've been working on them. And I think Utah State is working on similar things with smart controllers, irrigation product smart controllers. But it seems there's very little good research on those. So we're trying to do our own internal things, so we can maybe collaborate a little more with Utah State on that. And the other one is evapotranspiration data. We would like to have that data. We know the Climate Center has data. I guess we want better and more data. Not to make it sound like you're not doing anything, because you're doing great. But when we were looking at some historical ET data for some areas very specific in our service area in Davis-Weber counties, and it's difficult to find it. I don't know if it's just not available because of weather stations or if there's some other issue with getting that data to make it a little more specific instead of just Ogden Regional Airport, to try to predict and do some different things that are in Bountiful or that are in on the east benches of Ogden, because and maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe that's a discussion. Is how much does ET change or matter? I mean, local precipitation is going to change just by our local rainstorms and different events like that. But so maybe it's a question of, does that really make that much difference? And if it does, then let's try to get better ET data.
So it's been done, it's been done several with data. Roger can tell you more details. One is through instrument data, and then make every station to output ET, so you got broader coverage. The other one is through remote sensing. And Roger is also now leading an effort with a postdoc now, trying to develop that. And the key point is you can research to death with all this data, but then how can you make it operationally, and then to have it continuously run, and then fit into your need with the right format. It takes a lot of communication to make that work, and of course resource on the researchers on that. Roger, if you like to, you can talk about that, the ET project.
Well, and I was just going to say that it is important because you're talking about climate-based irrigation controllers. That's the information that they can be utilizing. And I didn't talk about it at all today, but that is an area of research that is ongoing for us. So, you know, irrigation technology is changing all the time, and I think climate-based controllers in particular have huge potential here. So we have evaluated some of those at the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. That's work that can be ongoing. We can be looking at soil moisture-based controllers, high efficiency sprinkler nozzles, et cetera. That's the kind of work that we definitely have planned to do. But, you know, specific requests from agencies like yours are very, very welcome in that regard.
Very quickly to follow up on the ET question, and we want to thank David for this because he got the short stick that prodded it, but the Climate Center is working on data access on their website that will give reference ET and rainfall by zip code. So there's enough of these small localized weather stations with maximum temperature, and they can use that to calculate ET, and then of course they have rainfall. So you should be able to get a much more localized estimate.
I want to move on to the last question within this talking about water conservation. In response to future climate extremes, such as recent droughts in the West, future heat waves, what conservation contingencies need more planning and research? So kind of just a little bit of a different version of the question we've just asked, but with thinking about more climate extremes in the future, drought, extreme heat events, is there any other research associated specifically with those sorts of climate extremes and water conservation that you may have needs for?
We want to put this in the context of California, what they went through, and what can we do that's better than California, which is not a high bar, but at least we need to start thinking about it.
Again, Chris Pengra, I think getting the data out to the people who are going to be making the policy decisions is what's the most important. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge in this room right now, but if you go and talk to the people who are setting the water policy in each of these municipalities and different agencies, and I don't know, maybe those conversations have been taking place at the level that they need to, but if I were to poll the other mayors of the other cities right now, my guess is that they probably wouldn't all be on the same page. They define their needs by what they're dealing with today, and there isn't, it's not their area of expertise. They don't have the same knowledge in their heads that you do in yours. And so that's not a new research request, but probably an area of focus.
So related to that, do you think there's opportunity perhaps with the League of Cities and Towns?
There would be.
Okay.
Probably also through the MPOs.
Okay.
Like Mountain Land Association of Governments would be a good opportunity.
Well, we have public information available. This is on different scales, but say we have air pollution issues along the Wasatch Front, and we have daily air quality reports. There's not really an analog. Not that everyone needs a daily drought report, but maybe there does need to be some. There is information available like that, but it's not widely distributed. Say, for example, there's a drought early warning system that's put out ultimately by a part of NOAA. For each region of the country. And this is that sort of information of trying to spark public awareness. And we don't really have an analog to that, to say air pollution forecasts along the Wasatch Front. at least I think that the average person and maybe even policymakers are routinely seeing. I know there are, you know, the NRCS and seasonal water predictions and things like that, but there's only a subset of people that are paying attention to those forecasts.
And that's good. And I think that what I'm talking about is probably more from a macro perspective, taking a look at when you have the modeling forgive me, I don't have the technical terms down yet. The paleoclimate data, and the predictive models that project out what we might see and what does a real drought look like in context of this region over a much longer period of time. Are we in one now? And I think the data suggests no, not really, not to the extent that it could be. And to help policymakers really understand what they're actually dealing with and not put everything in the context of just today, and to help them realize they do need to prepare for these events that may have a very significant impact on them that they're not even thinking about. I think that's the thing that would be helpful to help policymakers understand. And maybe the modeling isn't ready to present that data just yet, or maybe it is. I didn't get a feel for that yet, but that's what I was referring to, I think.
Thank you, Chris. Now, in the last few minutes we have here, and we may run a couple minutes past noon, if that's all right with everyone, to just go on to the final couple questions that really have to do with collaboration between these two communities here, between the research science community and water agencies and water managers. And first I want to pose the question of, in your experiences or what you can envision, what does effective collaboration and maybe co-production of research look like to your agencies? Maybe based on some of your past experiences, or maybe some experiences you've had where you wish something a little bit more or a little bit different happened. Go ahead, Tracy.
So Tracy Kirkham again with Salt Lake City. We have been embarking on a almost 3 or 4 year project with the University of Utah students as well as our Climate Center folks, trying to understand how this is going to impact our water supply. And I think that is this is a couple of years in the making, and I think that what we need to do now is try to develop strategies and adaptations to what we are going to do. And I think the expertise at the university has been very helpful to our agency. But we now need to take that advice and try to make a policy statement or something like that.
Thank you, Tracy. I know with Western Water Assessment's work here in Utah, that's working with Salt Lake Public Utilities has been kind of one of our shining examples of really, really effective collaboration and actually co-production of research and helping Salt Lake Utilities plan for what water supply will look like in the future. And I think what Tracy was getting at there is, at the end of what she said, is really kind of what I have in mind, is how do we take those next steps to bridge the gap between science that's created through research projects. I'm gonna pick on paleoclimate research. For example, we know paleoclimate research, it extends the record of river flows and drought back 1,000 years. So it gives us such a much larger picture at what the intensity and frequency and duration of drought will be. And that's very different than what we have during the historical record. However, how do we incorporate that information into the planning process for the future, both currently and looking into the future? Because I think everybody in this room can agree that that's some important information, and what we've seen in the last 1,000 years in terms of drought is very different from what we've seen in the last 100 years. So how do we help each other to take those next steps? What can the research community do to help incorporate information specifically paleoclimate information, but I'm just using that as an example of where sometimes there are those gaps. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Shilton. I got a big mouth, sorry. In an example of what Con is saying, IT departments in every company, they love their computers, they love their communications, they hate for people to actually use it because it breaks the system. And so going back to saying the reason that we have IT is to support the use that the users are trying to accommodate. And I think that's what we need to focus on research too, is that the research is really cool. And it is, just fascinating, a great interest. But the reason we need it is to support the end user.
So to follow up a little on what Con and Rachel just said, so is that kind of what I'm hearing is that we as the research community needs to really understand some of your operations a little bit better so that we can kind of alter the output of what we're creating for whatever research project we're working on to suit the operations, to smoothly fit into your operations. Can anybody think of some specific examples of what Con's talking about, of maybe where you have worked with research scientists and you've kind of hit that wall that you know that this may be useful information, but it just doesn't really quite fit into your operations well? Like I know I heard Scott Paxman talk about that when we were specifically talking about paleoclimate data, that there's a recognition of this could be important, but has it gotten into our operations? No, it hasn't quite yet.
Sorry, I feel like I'm speaking a lot, but to give you some insight as to how at least we operate as a city, and I know it's the same for probably many of the water managers, we take a look at very specific things and then typically come back with a planning document on what the next steps are to resolve those challenges as we move forward. That can take place in different, or it can be delivered in different formats, but for instance, right now with our water system, when we're looking at water conservation, we can save a whole lot of water by just changing the way that we operate our system. We can conserve, well, it won't go into all the detail, but we're working with different firms right now to identify some of the ways that we can be more efficient with the electricity usage of our water system. And we take a look at all of this stuff and then we put it into a planning document, and then we know how to move forward to kind of meet some of these objectives. And I think that same approach can be taken with water conservation through all the things that we're talking about, and have that data integrated, and then also give you guys more information as to maybe what areas need to be focused on the most. I know that you typically don't operate in that way as a consultant or as a planner, but maybe that's the piece that's missing, is how do you get the planner involved in the middle, and who fills that role, so that you've got the policymakers and the system managers connected to the researchers.
Thank you, Chris.
David Rosenberg with Utah State. I'll just add on one comment to what Con suggested about involving the end users and researchers sitting down. There's a branch of our research called participatory modeling, where we try and involve the people who actually know about the system that we're modeling from the beginning, and as a way to make sure that the right information is being used, the modeling effort is addressing the right questions, so on and so forth. We're in various degrees of doing this with some other projects. One of the probably more successful examples we've had so far is with the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, where we've developed a model to help them figure out how to allocate water and to manage invasive vegetation so that they can they can create habitat for the priority bird species that they're managing for. And I certainly, going into that project, did not know what the important birds are that visit the refuge, but through that process learned, and we're also able to do to go forward with that to provide useful recommendations for them. One of the interesting examples that came out of that project was they try and just keep their water levels in their wetland units static throughout the year and just hold on to those levels as long as possible until they don't have any more water, whereas the model was showing that they could more dynamically adjust, raise, and lower the wetland unit levels to improve habitat. So we would certainly be interested in doing more of that. I think it works.
Does anyone else have any comments on this topic before we wrap things up? Well, I just want to echo that what David just said, that the conveners of this meeting and all of the research scientists involved in this meeting here really much want to engage you as the stakeholders and water resource managers, water agencies, in trying to really tailor the research that we're doing to meet your needs. And sometimes that might just be adjusting the specific output of how to effectively, for example, picking on Justin's paleoclimate again, how to effectively get that drought information about drought into the structure of how you plan. So with that, I think we will wrap up the meeting here. There will be a couple follow-ups to this meeting. One is we'd really like your feedback on how this meeting went. This is a little different format than this meeting has been in the past. We will send out an email to the entire group with a link to a survey, or I believe there's surveys that are on the table outside. Right in the corner. Surveys are right over there if you prefer to fill one out on paper right now. We'll also send a follow-up email with some climate information that maybe some resources for climate information that many of you may know about, may not know about, but we'll kind of send a bit of a laundry list of some appropriate climate information resources. And I think that's...
And links to the whole presentations being recorded.
Yes.
And so we'll have links to the video abstracts, to the presentations, and to the facilitated discussion. And then the email contacts of all the presenters if you have any questions.
Would anyone here be opposed to, amongst this group, distributing a list of all the participants with email contacts? Just so that if this meeting sparks any, dialogue amongst organizations that didn't previously have that, would that be amenable to everyone? Okay, well, we'll send that out with the email as well. Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it.